Welcome to Life Stories. Tonight, we bring you a powerful story of love, betrayal, and self-discovery. After losing her husband, Emily did everything she could to keep her life together and provide for her son, Ethan. But when her own parents and sister manipulated her for money while rejecting her child, she had to make a choice: continue seeking approval from a family that never valued her, or walk away to protect the one person who mattered most. What she discovered in the process changed everything. Stay with us as we unfold Emily's journey. Subscribe to the channel to begin today's story with Life Stories. It had been 8 months since the accident at the construction site took Jake from them. Yet some days it felt like yesterday. The pain never really faded, it just settled into the background, waiting for the quiet moments to creep back in. In the beginning, the days blurred together. A mix of paperwork, sleepless nights, and the heavy, suffocating weight of grief. Emily often found herself waking up in the middle of the night, reaching across the bed out of habit, only to be met with the cold emptiness where Jake used to be. That was always the hardest part, the moment between sleep and wakefulness when, for just a few seconds, she could forget. Then reality would come crashing back. Through it all, Linda and Robert had been her lifeline. Jake's parents had shown up without hesitation, stepping in to help with Ethan in ways Emily hadn't even known she needed. Every day, without fail, Robert picked Ethan up from school while Linda made sure he had a warm meal and a comforting home to walk into. Their support was not just practical, it was woven with love. Quiet and steady. The kind of love that asked for nothing in return. Emily wasn't sure how she would have managed without them. She often stopped by their house after work to pick Ethan up. And every single time, Linda tried to give her money. Last week, she had caught Emily off guard again, slipping an envelope into her purse just as she was about to leave. Emily had pulled it out immediately, shaking her head. "Linda, really? I can't take this." Her voice was firm, but Linda's kind eyes met hers with gentle insistence. "Sweetheart, we just want to help," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "We know the insurance company took care of things. But your family. Let us do this." She was right. The insurance company had paid out $300,000 after Jake's death. Between that and Emily's stable income as a marketing manager, she and Ethan were managing just fine. But it was never about the money with Linda and Robert. It was about love. About the way they made sure she never felt alone. About the way they treated Ethan as though the loss of his father was their own burden to bear. If only her own parents had been half as supportive. It had always been clear where Emily stood in her family. Stephanie had been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. It wasn't bitterness that made Emily see it that way, it was just the truth. When they were kids, Stephanie had always been the one their parents doted on. The one who got the words of praise, the warm smiles, the unquestioning support. Emily, on the other hand, learned early on that expectations for her were different, lower, perhaps, but more rigid. She wasn't given the same leeway, the same unquestioning love. That favoritism had only grown more obvious with time. Now, as adults, it extended to the next generation. Stephanie's children were the ones their parents fawned over, the ones they spoke about with pride, while Ethan was tolerated. Last weekend had been typical. Ethan had been so excited to see his grandparents, bouncing in his seat the whole drive there. But within 20 minutes of arriving, her mother was sighing in exasperation. "Why does the clock make that sound?" Ethan had asked, pointing at their antique grandfather clock, his bright blue eyes wide with curiosity. "How does it work inside?" Emily hadn't even had the chance to answer before her mother sighed and rolled her eyes. "Can't you control him?" she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. "He's always asking questions about everything." Her father, who had been absent-mindedly scrolling through his laptop, barely glanced up. "Here, buddy," he said, clicking a few buttons before holding the screen out. "Why don't you play some games instead? I downloaded some new ones for you." But Ethan didn't want games. He wanted to talk, to learn, to connect. And yet, there in that house, he was being taught, silently, insidiously, that his curiosity was a nuisance. That his natural inclination to explore the world around him was something to be stifled, not encouraged. Meanwhile, Stephanie's 3 kids sat in the corner, barely looking up from their phones. They were the picture of quiet, disengaged children, the kind their parents held up as ideal. And in their eyes, that was what good behavior looked like. Emily had learned long ago to bite her tongue, to ignore the comparisons, to let the unfairness of it all wash over her. She had spent years training herself to believe it didn't matter. But watching Ethan's small shoulders sag just a little, seeing the flicker of confusion and hurt cross his face, made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. They might not have been able to see what they were doing to him, but she could. And she would not let it happen again. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday dinner at her parents' house. A routine she had kept out of habit more than anything else. But Emily should have known something was off the moment she walked through the door. The house smelled of her mother's lasagna, a dish she rarely made unless she wanted something. Her father was uncharacteristically chatty, asking about her work, about Ethan, about everything with a level of interest that felt forced. They were building up to something, circling her like sharks waiting for the right moment to strike. Emily sat down at the dinner table, carefully cutting into her lasagna as the conversation drifted into neutral topics. But then her mother set down her fork, her tone deliberately casual. "So, Emily, we've been meaning to ask you something. How much was Jake's life insurance payout?" The question hit her like a slap. She almost choked on her water, caught completely off guard by the sheer bluntness of it. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Or maybe she was just tired of keeping secrets from people who had never really treated her like family. Either way, the truth slipped out before she could think twice. $300,000, she said quietly, watching as both of their faces shifted. Her mother's fork clattered against the plate. Her father's head snapped up so fast she thought he might hurt himself. For a moment, they just stared at her, as if she had announced she had won the lottery. Then came the inevitable response. The one she should have expected. "Well," her mother said, placing her napkin neatly beside her plate, "what are you planning to do with all that money?" Emily felt the weight of their expectations press down on her, heavy and suffocating. She had rehearsed this answer in her mind before. Not for them, but for herself. For the moments when doubt crept in. "I've invested it," she explained, keeping her voice steady. "It's for Ethan's future. His college. Maybe an apartment when he's older. Jake and I always talked about setting something aside for him." Her father waved a dismissive hand. "That's years away. Emily. You should be thinking about the present. About yourself and your family." The way he said family made it clear he wasn't talking about Ethan. She recognized that tone. It was the same one they had used when they helped Stephanie with the down payment on her house. The same one they had used when they funded her wedding, her trips, her life. "You could do so much with that money now," her mother added, leaning forward, her voice dripping with false warmth. "You could help your family, the people who need it today, not save it all for some distant future that might not even." Emily cut her off before she could finish. "I'm not discussing my money anymore." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. But she didn't regret it. The silence that followed was thick, filled with unspoken accusations and familiar disappointment. Her father's face clouded over in the way it always did when she refused to play her role. Her mother pressed her lips into a thin line, a sure sign that trouble was brewing. The rest of the dinner passed in tense silence, the clinking of silverware against plates the only sound between them. Emily knew what would come next. The silent treatment, the disapproving stares, the quiet reminders that she had, once again, failed to meet their expectations. She had spent a lifetime learning to live with their disappointment. She just never thought she would be so grateful for it. A week passed before her mother called again. Her voice warm. Too warm. As if the previous dinner had never happened. Emily. Sweetheart. We're having a family dinner on Sunday. Stephanie and the kids will be there too. You have to come. Something about her tone made Emily uneasy. But she agreed. More out of curiosity than obligation. When Sunday arrived, she pulled into the driveway and noticed more cars than usual. Walking up to the door, she could hear the familiar sounds of laughter, conversation, the clinking of glasses. It felt almost festive. She stepped inside and was met with a sight that made her stomach drop. The house was filled with children, Stephanie's 3. Their cousins. Even distant relatives she hadn't seen in years. She stood frozen in the doorway, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. A week ago, her mother had told her Christmas would be adults only. She had specifically told Emily not to bring Ethan. And yet, here were all the children, running around, wearing paper crowns, laughing, playing, as if nothing was wrong. Her aunt was the first to spot her, rushing over with a bright smile. Emily. Sweetheart. Where's Ethan? Don't tell me he's sick on Christmas Eve. Before she could answer, another voice chimed in. Yeah. Where's our little scientist? It was her cousin Peter. Jake's been wanting to show him his new chemistry set. More relatives gathered, all asking the same question. Where was Ethan? Why had she come alone? Each inquiry felt like a knife twisting in her gut. Through the crowd, she spotted her mother in the kitchen, arranging cookies on a tray, completely at ease, as if nothing was wrong, as if she hadn't just uninvited her own grandson from Christmas. Emily made her way through the room, her steps purposeful, her heart pounding. She stopped in the hallway, waiting for her mother to notice her. It took a moment, but when she did, her face remained composed. Emily. Dear. You made it. Put your presents under the tree. We'll open them after dinner. Emily's voice was low, controlled. You told me this was an adults-only party. You specifically told me not to bring Ethan. So why are Stephanie's kids here? Why are all the cousins here? Her mother straightened her Christmas sweater, avoiding her gaze. That's different. Different how? Emily's patience was running thin. Her mother gestured vaguely toward the living room. Those children know how to behave at formal gatherings. They're well-mannered. Emily stared at her in disbelief. Ethan is one of the most polite children I know. His teachers praise his behavior constantly. Linda and Robert always say. Her mother rolled her eyes. Oh, Linda and Robert. They spoil him. They encourage all those endless questions. The other children. They deserve to be here. They know their place. As if on cue, a commotion erupted from the dining room. Stephanie's youngest son, Kevin, had grabbed a handful of deviled eggs and was throwing them at his sister. The eggs splattered against her dress as she shrieked. Emily turned back to her mother, her expression unreadable. Yes, I can clearly see their superior manners on display. Her mother's face hardened. That's just children being children. Emily's voice didn't waver. But when Ethan asks questions, that's unacceptable. Her mother shrugged. Uninterested. He's fine with Linda and Robert. Something inside Emily snapped. She had spent her whole life trying to earn their approval. To be seen. To be enough. But tonight, she saw the truth with absolute clarity. She would never be enough for them. But she would always be enough for Ethan. Without another word, she turned toward the door. Her mother's voice followed her. At least put the presents under the tree before you leave. Emily didn't look back. Emily drove through the quiet streets, her hands gripping the wheel tightly, her mind racing with everything that had just unfolded. The betrayal, the manipulation, the realization that she had spent years trying to belong in a family that had never truly valued her. But this time, she wasn't leaving in anger. She was leaving with clarity. When she arrived at Linda and Robert's house, she could see the warm glow of Christmas lights through the window. Inside, Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table, carefully decorating a cookie while Robert leaned over, listening intently as Ethan explained his design. The sight made Emily's chest tighten. This was love. This was family. She stepped inside, setting her coat down as Linda greeted her with a knowing smile. "You're just in time." Ethan was about to start on the gingerbread house. Ethan turned, his face lighting up. "Mom, look at what Grandpa Robert taught me." Emily knelt beside him, taking in the messy but beautiful cookie he had made. "It's perfect," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. That night, as they sat together, surrounded by warmth and laughter, Emily knew she had made the right choice. She had spent so much time chasing the approval of people who would never give it, when all along, real love had been right in front of her. She would never again beg for a place in a family that didn't want her. She had found her own. Thank you for watching Life Stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos.